to introduce you guys to Bruce Sanguin. Bruce Sanguin is going to be our guest speaker today. He is a leader in evolutionary spirituality. He's a psychotherapist who lives on Denman Island, where he uses psychedelics when indicated in his practice. He's the author of 7 books, including his most recent titled Dismantled, How Psychedelics Broke a Clergyman and Put Him Back Together. As well as he is, as you can imagine by the title, a clergyman. So he's taking early retirement after 28 years in the United Church of Canada. So Bruce is going to be, we're going to be basically having a little bit of a conversation on trauma, healing, and psychedelics and sort of the intersection of these. Basically with that, I'd like to welcome Bruce. Bruce, thank you for being here.
Hey, Christoph. It's a delight to be with you and all of your community. It's
Absolutely.
So nice to see so many smiling faces out there. I can see you all across my Zoom screen here, so I feel a little connected.
Welcome to the community, Bruce. We would be doing this in obviously like an actual physical setting, and that's sort of our ideal, but of course we're limited by that. But I did want to sort of just touch up on just to get everyone up to date a little bit too, is that you reached out to me recently. We had this whole thing planned for a while, but you were suggesting that maybe we could switch up the format a little bit. So we do it a little bit more in a sort of talk and conversation way in which that we can be a little bit, well, let's just say more authentic in a way so that I can sort of try and represent the ethos of the group and ask some questions to maybe steer the conversation to help represent some of the curiosities that the group might have with regards to our conversation today. So that's a conversation I'm absolutely excited to embark on with you, and yeah, I'd love to get going on this. So I wanted to ask you, just to start off, maybe we can just sort of like take a step back and just look at your background and see sort of like where you've kind of come from. You've done 28 years with the United Church of Canada. So you've been a pastor for 28 years. And kind of going from this to the point where you are sort of fully embracing psychedelics. It's a very interesting story, and maybe not the usual trajectory. And I know there's a lot to it, but if you can maybe give us a little bit of the sort of the Spark Notes version, the Reader's Digest of sort of like how you came to this.
Sure. Well, I guess I was always a meaning freak. And so, I converted to Christianity when some Anglican evangelist said that Jesus was the way, the truth, and the life, et cetera, et cetera. And so I went for it. Mainly that was to satisfy this search for meaning. And so I just happened it went okay, being a clergy person in the United Church of Canada. And so I kept it going, and, I was successful. And then, I hit a place where I was doing more speaking about the books that I had written on the road than I was spending time in the congregation. So I was kind of easing my way out of that anyways. And so when I finally decided that it was time, that was about 8 years ago. I never really looked back. I don't, have any regrets about my time in the church. I do wish that I had these psychedelic experiences before when I was in the church. I think I would have been a far more effective clergyman. So heads up to any of the officials out there who happen to be in the church. Like, I think this would be great training in seminary. Like, get people on psilocybin or acid. Because subsequently, one of the interesting things has been that I've gained many deeper esoteric insights into interpretations of, what's going on in the Gospels in and through these experiences. So, but once I decided to leave the church, I was basically done with the church. And so I haven't been back inside a church for 7 years since I left. No ill feelings. It's just not, lighting me up in any kind of way right now. And shortly after I left, someone told me that they were going to an ayahuasca weekend. And, you know, I had heard about it, and of course, when you're in the church, you can't take weekends off to do these things, and you can't do them anyways without great risk to your career. So I said, sure, let's go. And so that began my path into psychedelics, was through ayahuasca. And then began the great dismantling of who I imagined Bruce to be. Yeah, so that's a little background.
Bruce, did you want to tell us a little bit about what led you to that? Like, how did you get into psychedelics, and then what, if we can use that to dovetail into like what this first psychedelic experience was like for you? I know in your book you mentioned that you realized your life is not your own. I think that was the quotes you said, or shattered your raft and threw you a lifeline. I think that was referring to your ayahuasca experience.
Yeah, yeah. What really drove me to psychedelics, I mean, one was my interest in transcendence and sort of mystical experiences, and maybe experiencing for myself this non-dual state of consciousness that so much had been written about in relation to the psychedelic experience. The other thing that drove me was I was in a new relationship with a woman that I believe to be my soulmate, but I found that I wasn't really fit for the kind of depth of intimacy that was possible now. And so there was just a lot of shit getting in the way of me opening my heart and being totally available for love. And so a combination of like kind of interested in expanding consciousness and getting to the bottom of what were these barriers to profoundly loving this woman who was gifted to me, drove me to ayahuasca. And so, yeah, early on in those ayahuasca experiences, like I saw the whole thing. I saw how I had constructed a personality in response to early trauma. And you know how these things are. It's like it all happens in a flash. You see everything at once. And I saw in its entirety how I had constructed this external personality to deal with my heartbreak. And I kind of staggered out of the maloka. It was a warm summer night, and sat outside in the grass. And I think the exact words were, fuck me, my life hasn't been my own. You know, I was like 54 at the time. So it's a very sobering realization to come to an awareness that you haven't been orienting from your authentic nature, but rather from a personality that had done well in the world, you know, was a success, an author, you know, speaker, you know. So having realized that, then began the healing journey of looking in a more complex way at the construction of my ego, and then what was underneath that. And that took dozens of ceremonies, not just a few for me anyways. And then my own journey with psychedelic psychotherapy with a therapist, in which I used a combination of MDMA and LSD.
So it's the journey was only just starting at that point. I wanted to...
This is an interesting thing though, Christoph. I'll just say that I was already trained as a psychotherapist, but I chose to go into the church. But I had done a lot of psychotherapy, but the amazing thing is that the power of these medicines were that it was just powerful medicine, because you know you're in there and you're experiencing what's really real, and so it just took me to a deeper place than I was able to get in the modalities that I had used in other forms of therapy. So
One of the things you mentioned too was, and I think you were alluding to this sort of like the false self, right? That like that's what sort of broke down.
Yeah,
Um, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like what exactly is this, and how
sure.
yeah how that relates into? Or we'll get into trauma in a second. But do you want to talk a little bit about the false self?
Sure. Well, to begin with, let's talk about an original self. Like we all come into the world, we incarnate from this realm of spirit, whatever your metaphysics are, and into this body, into the realm of time, mortality, et cetera, et cetera. But I think in that entrance, we come um, in our original self full of beauty and full of radiance and ready to show up for love and joy and connection and relationship. And then, the only job of a parent, I think, is to amplify the radiance that we see in these little ones and just go, my God, you're so beautiful. Look at you. And it's just like light, more light, more light, more light. And, that's the ideal situation. But unfortunately, because of the history of millennia of trauma, there's not many of us that are able to withstand the wattage of these souls that are born into the world. And so we find a way to dim that radiance. And we find ourselves enacting different forms of violence on the ones that we're supposed to love. And this is just the reality. So, so there's this original beautiful soul that we all are, discovers that he or she is on the receiving end of maybe emotional neglect, maybe physical, sexual abuse, maybe profound indifference, maybe a mother or a father who themselves weren't parented well, so there's an unconscious expectation that the child will parent them and be there for them, and it's too much responsibility. And all of a sudden we realize that we can't be who we are if we're going to survive. So, and some of this violence that's being enacted about it, in our direction, we internalize. It's unbearable, and we form what I just call core unconscious beliefs about who we are that are not. We're not beautiful. We're not these creatures worthy of love, and but rather what happens is these beliefs, or I just call them premature conclusions about reality out there and reality in here, is, for example, I uncovered a whole bunch of them about myself that I didn't know. One was I'm bad. Another was I don't belong. Another was reality's too much for me. Another one was my fault. Another one was I am the cause of your misery. And these are deep and they're unconscious, and it's like we repress them and we're in denial about them. But what we have to do to get by in the world, if we deeply believe, for example, Christoph, that we're bad, like I'm bad, then what I'll do is construct a personality in which is I'll be good for you. In order to survive, I must be bad because you're not loving me. You can't be bad because my survival depends on you being good. If you're not good, then this life is too precarious. So I come to the conclusion I'm bad. It's my fault. I take that on. So what I'll do, and in order so that you can parent me, is I'll be good. So already we twist ourselves out of shape. We construct a part of our personality to say, I'll be I'll be a good boy. I'll tune into what it is that you need, what it is that you want from me. I'll leave behind my own deepest desires because those are bad. Those get me in trouble. Something's getting me in trouble, so it must be my own desires. I won't want anything from you, but I'll just tune into you. Very sensitive operation. I'll construct a personality that's totally tuned in to what you need and want from me so that you don't kill me.
And
essentially, that's what it comes down to. And so that, that gets very elaborate, and we form, and that becomes the false self, or the survivor self, or the trauma self, whatever you want to call it. And that's how we orient in the world, except for the most part, it's all unconscious. We just think that's us, that egoic expression, which is this constructed personality. We just assume that's me.
So, and the way I'm sort of synthesizing this too, and correct me if I'm sort of oversimplifying this a little bit, but we have these core unconscious beliefs, which are ones that we're not aware of even when and they're usually formed when we're in like early childhood, and they sort of affect the way we construct or view our reality later on in life. And then, and these are the ones that you're talking about, like I am bad, I can't love, things like that. And to this, we like the defense system or sort of compensatory action, what you call it, the CABs. These are the compensatory actions and beliefs. So these are, from what I understand, like almost diametrically opposite. Like they're trying to compensate for whatever it is. So if you say like, I am bad, it's all kinds of compensations that are trying to bring you to make it seem like you are good. Is that sort of like a little bit, like for example, like if it's my fault, or you're saying if I'm not enough, you're doing actions that, or you're sort of creating these unconscious beliefs that are trying to act in opposite direction to that.
Yeah. So for example, if I'm not enough is a core unconscious belief that got formed in response to failures of love. Then the compensatory action and belief is to say, I must always be enough. And if anything in the environment, my partner or my boss or anyone even hints at the possibility that I'm inadequate, my defense system will come up and attack that person. Because what's at risk of leaking through is the core unconscious belief. Like their comment about my adequacy it raised anxiety in me, which is always a sign that they're breaching the wall of my defense system, which is basically my personality. And so they're touching into I'm a failure, which is this core unconscious belief. And I have to defend myself against that because my very life survival depends on that. If that's true, then I'm not going to survive. And so I form all of these defensive reactions, which are egoic reactions, in order to defend myself against this terrible conclusion I came to about reality, that I'm inadequate. Mm. Now, notice none of this is true. This is all egoic stuff, but it was once true. The conditions were such that I had to survive, and so I formed these unconscious beliefs, and then I created these compensatory actions and beliefs, and then I defended against it all. And just keep in mind that behind all of this and under all of this is this original beauty, this original self that actually never goes offline, that actually is never sullied or stained by this. It's always there waiting for us to discover. But because we're so defended and so committed to this egoic identity and attached to that identity, we never drop. It's harder to drop below that to see, oh my God, I'm so beautiful. You're so beautiful. Like, there's natural intrinsic beauty and worth in you and in me. Let's orient from that place. So that's the work of dismantling. It's basically we're dismantling the personality that we constructed because our hearts were broken.
And that's and part of this, if I'm trying to get this right, with the thesis in here is as well that it's a lot of these sort of the trauma and all this, and these aren't by the way, you distinguish between like the major traumas that are obvious that most people think of, like someone coming back from wartime or things like that where they've had obvious psychological trauma, but you're talking about a lot of these things are like very small things that usually people aren't aware of, and they all happen in this sort of like young childhood, the adverse childhood experiences that you talk about. And you relate them to, in this case, a failure of love. So for example, you talk about like also like the intensity, like sort of like numbing out the intensity of children, like that sort of beautiful, like natural intensity that comes out.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk a little bit about that? Like,
Sure. Well, I mean, I love that. I think it was Colin Wilson who defined intensity as as a kind of the inherent, like a realization of the inherent value of life and intensity. So that before, so it's basically a yes to life. It's an unambiguous yes to it all. This is so great. Look at, you know, I got to live, you know. That's the intensity that goes offline when our hearts are broken, because it's just not safe to feel. Because if we let in the intense beauty and goodness of life, and our how much we love, because we came in as incarnations of love, is my metaphysics, then we also have to open to the suffering that's being enacted on us. And because we're not equipped, we don't have the resources or the support to integrate this terrible heartbreak, we shut down the intensity of life. And so our yes gets turned into a no. Our unambiguous openness and like, bring it on. This is just like, this is just the best. You know, like, what an opportunity here becomes, I don't know, like, and so we live in a state of contraction because the intensity of the good stuff reminds us that folded into that are these failures of love that we experienced when before the intensity went offline. It was devastating because we were so open. It's like one of the things that happened to me in the, you know, the jungles of Mexico was I felt what it was like to be a 2-year-old toddler and experience that my mother actually didn't love me. And it was like unimaginable. Like, I never want to go there again. The sorrow, it's like I was crawling around on my hands and knees. So, and the mantra was, I'm a motherless child. So I was identified with the toddler. But as an adult, before I was doing this work, if you had asked me, I would say, well, no, you know, life isn't great. It wasn't the greatest childhood in the world, but you know, it was okay. We all got by, and here we are. But here I was going, gee, this is like the end of the world, you know. And so, if we want to get back to that unambiguous yes to life, we got to go back through to the heartbreak of when we started shutting down, when we started forming our no to the other, because the other is dangerous. The other could hurt us. Trust has gone offline. We stopped trusting that life is for us. We stopped trusting really that anybody's for us. We just don't know. We're suspicious, contract a little bit, our heart's closed. But, you know, I'm here to say that it is possible to get back to a yes that embraces both the beauty, but also the suffering, also the agony, because we know now as adults, having gone back into that original suffering that we weren't resourced, that we can now deal with it. It was unbearable then, but we can actually survive whatever comes our way now. But we don't know it, so we hold on to this no.
So I would say it's sort of amazing to see that that so many people can hold on to these and just not even like, you can live so much of your life not being aware of like all these things that are going on, and like all these sort of, well, they're subconscious in that sense. But I guess what I'm trying to ask with this is like, at what point, like, what are ways of getting at this? And it's like, where do psychedelics fit into this? Like, what is, like, how does that work? And maybe how do you approach that as a psychotherapist?
Yeah, well, you know, because, you know, our because our well-being depends on healthy relationships, because our hearts were broken in the context of intimate relationship, the healing, I think, can only occur in the context of intimate relationship as well. And for me, that's the psychotherapeutic journey. You're journeying with another person who says, I'll come alongside you and be with you in whatever comes up for you. And my commitment is that I'll contain whatever's there, with the hope that the person that I'm journeying with will come to a conclusion that, okay, here's a person who has no interest in hurting me. And the moment, in other words, the trust is regained. And the moment trust is regained, the healing comes back online. The moment that person really believes that this person who represents reality in this form, reality come in this human form, here's one person at least who doesn't seem to want to hurt me, who only wants to be for me. Maybe, therefore, I can dissolve that old belief that reality is against me, that everybody's against me, that if I'm not careful, someone's going to hurt me, that somebody really wants to hurt me. So I think that's the psychotherapeutic relationship is a relationship with two people. The obstinate attempt, I think R.D. Laing called it, the obstinate attempt of two people to stay in a connected relationship until trust happens. Now, into that relationship, when indicated, and for me, it's when my client says, you know, like, I'd like to try psychedelics. I read some research, whatever. So they can be introduced as a tool, which I would say catalyzes, amplifies, helps to bring to the fore these unconscious beliefs that are getting in the way, that are obstacles to love. So I think that's the role of psychedelics for me, is that it reveals in a very intense way my obstacles, your obstacles to love, to a deepening of intimacy and the capacity to return to a fundamental yes to life.
Okay. What would you say, so, because I know one of the questions that we often get with these sort of situations where people are using, so when you do have a client that you are working with that does, is maybe having, it could be their first time or they're relatively new to this sort of experience with psychedelics. When you're exploring these sort of traumas and things in the past as well, do you, like, at what point do you know if say the things that they're realizing on that are, like, at what point do they know is it like maybe actually an insight, or is it more of a delusion?
My bias, like, you know, psychedelic means mind opening or mind manifesting. So I don't think the psychedelic puts anything into our minds that's not already there. It reveals what's already present. So I'm not one of these people who thinks that something comes up and it's all a delusion. I trust that what comes up is actual. This person, you know, is what they're experiencing is what they're experiencing. I have no reason to distrust it. So I never assume that they're delusional or that they're quote unquote hallucinating or that something's happening that's not real. I assume that everything that comes up is integral to their healing. So I never question it in that way.
Yeah. And one of the things too is we have, like, some people sometimes wonder, like, what the whole, like, the psychotherapeutic relationship, like, how does that look? Like, what do people come in, like, what kind of questions are they asked? Like, how do you build that relationship with them so that they feel comfortable? And like, what sort of indications, like, what criteria do you need to have met to the point that you can say, oh, this person is ready to take that next step?
Yeah. Well, you know, fundamentally, what I need to do as a therapist is assess whether an individual feels so burdened by the responsibilities of life that they're so overwhelmed at this point in their life that they might harbor an unconscious desire to use psychedelics to check out, you know, to get out of the responsibility of life, and to do that either through some kind of, you know, maybe a psychotic episode, or actually, you know, maybe they want to act on some kind of suicidal impulse, and this is their opportunity. So if I, as a therapist, feel like this person is way overburdened by life, there's too much responsibility, and they're basically going to use this just to escape, I will just stay doing, you know, conventional psychotherapy, building the relationship, building trust, until I have a sense, okay, this person can handle the responsibility of taking these medicines without the overwhelming desire to escape from reality.
And what does the healing journey look like? I know you outlined there's a good a number of steps. You outlined the 8 steps sort of for healing, but did you want to give us a little bit of a bit of a summary of sort of like what people can expect, for example, when they're sort of trying to heal from these or make progress on their traumas?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's so individual that it's difficult to say, but essentially you're creating a space / coming alongside a person with a commitment to that you have no interest in hurting them. And so through your language and your listening and the field that you create through open-heartedness, you try to create a space in which this person can experience what it's like to trust again. That maybe I can let down. And I would say that the direction of health is always downwards. It's always like most of us come out of childhood feeling like we need to prop ourselves up. We need to move, you know, and so a lot of spirituality even is like ascent, up, up, up. But I would say a lot of healing is like down and down into the body, down into our feelings, you know, and so when, you know, over time, and everybody's different in terms of the timing that it takes, you know, people start to come, you know, individuals start to come into therapy and they start to let down. Their breathing becomes deeper. You know, they start to relax. And in that condition of relaxation, deeper breathing, you know, stuff that needs to be worked on comes to the surface. And often it surfaces in terms of the dynamics in this relationship right here. Because all that trauma is going to come up between us right here. Eventually, it's going to be acted out. Like, you know, I was on LSD, you know, with my therapist. And all of a sudden I looked at him and said, do you really want to be here, or are you just here because you're getting paid? In other words, it was an issue of trust. What do you want to? And the real issue was that my early experience was that my mother didn't actually want to be there. And she was doing it out of a sense of obligation. So eventually that dynamic is going to come up in the context of the psychotherapeutic relationship. It's like, do you love me? I mean, really? Are you going to be here? Are you going to leave? When are you going to leave? You're going to leave at some point. You're going to check out, right? Because people check out. They say they love me and then they treat me like shit. So when's that going to happen? You're just setting me up, right? You know, so-called transference, countertransference, and then I get my feelings. And then eventually it becomes a matter of me not acting like a therapist. It's like me exiting the role of therapist and just realizing, I just want to be Bruce with you. Let's just, you and me, let's see what's there. Let's go. Are you up for it? Like, let's do this.
The trust is, I mean, clearly that's a fundamental part of this. And I'm wondering too a little bit with, so I know you've spoken to like when you've had, you found some good efficacy with like LSD and a combination of MDMA as well. I know MDMA is partially like as an entheogen, and it also works to lower the defenses. Is this sort of a way of like amplifying the trust, or maybe even artificially creating trust, or and are there any potential drawbacks to that as well in a psychotherapeutic session?
Well, the important thing to note is that it doesn't necessarily create trust just because you've taken LSD, or, you know, it might bring to the surface distrust.
Mm-hmm.
And the client, the person sitting, you know, that I'm sitting with goes like, wow, I'm really aware that I think you're going to attack me. They're certain. And then I'll say, well, ask me. And then they'll say, well, are you planning to attack me? I'll go, no. And the nice thing about MDMA or any of these medicines is that they go, okay, like the defenses drop, and you go, okay, I just needed to check out that you're really not going to attack me. No, I'm not going to attack you. So it's not necessarily that it just brings up it intensifies whatever the dynamics are going on in the relationship right then and there. So it could be distrust that comes up, and then you work it through. But it gets you, it can happen fast on the medicine.
Bruce, I want to be a little bit mindful of our time too, and just leave a little bit for the Q&A, because I know there's a bunch of questions that are already popping into the chat. But I wanted to maybe just ask you a little bit, just to kind of finish off, is like, how do you, when it comes to these sort of therapeutic sessions, I know it varies a lot from person to person, but do you find that there's like is there a rapid acceleration with the use of psychedelics, like when you do incorporate that into the psychotherapy, or is it just maybe just another tool in the toolkit for sort of helping deal with certain types of traumas? Or like, is there a specific indication where it's more effective, or is it like a broad-based tool that you can use in a general? I mean, I know there's lots of research behind this as well, but like in your experience, what do you find? And also, what kind of time frame? Like, is it a couple of sessions, or is this going to be years of work?
Those are really great questions. The answer is that it's different for every person. People's health takes the time that it takes. And so, some people will, spend years before they can feel the presence of trust again. Another person will come in and maybe it's like 6 weeks. Another person, maybe it's 2 weeks. So you never know. It takes the time that it takes. And all that's required is loving patience and zero ambition on the part of the therapist. Because especially on psychedelics, if a client picks up on that I have ambition for them to be a certain way, or to get through a certain thing, or become a certain thing, and they should do it quickly, it's going to all be in the room. And then it's going to re-traumatize them, because it's just going to be like their parent once again has expectations for them that are beyond them, and it's going to not work. So you really have to take a non-ambitious stance here. I think one of the challenges with all the research that's coming out is that you get these models, for example, from MAPS, where, in 3 sessions of MDMA, 6 weeks apart, people have these incredible results, and they're all better, and they're better after, so great. I mean, I suppose that's true for some people. Or you get single session high dose psilocybin, and people are cured forever. I think that can happen. But in my experience, like, for example, I've done over 50 ayahuasca ceremonies. I did 15 sessions using LSD and MDMA with my psychotherapists on a monthly basis. So I don't think that we should set people up for the expectation that just because they take psychedelics, they're going to immediately sort of crash through all this stuff. It just, sometimes they do, but it takes the time that it takes. And so psychedelics they're a wonderful resource to the psychotherapeutic experience. But I would say, given the sensational research that comes out now, they want to promote it to the fantastic results. Yeah, I just think people should moderate their expectations.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right with that. Also, just totally paying attention to misconstruing that research and even maybe overhyping it in a certain way. But definitely something to talk on. And what we're gonna do now, Bruce, is that there's actually so many good points and a lot of questions I wanted to get to as well. But I think if we can open it up, and we'll just kind of keep going with some more questions during the Q&A panel. But what I'll do is I'll have Ken just come in and just give us about a minute just to kind of go through the rules and etiquette, and then we'll go right back to this for another half an hour. So thanks for all that, Bruce.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Christoph.
Excellent, excellent. So yeah, everybody, for the Q&A session, I've already got a bunch that were sent in during Bruce's talk, which I'll go through first, and then in Zoom, there's a raise hand feature. On a computer and phone is different, so you'll have to figure that one out, that you can use to, and then I'll unmute people as we go to let you ask your question to Bruce. And so yeah, the first one we've got from Elena is the QA was, are psychoactive plants conscious entities that are trying to help humanity evolve for the sake of planetary life?
Well, you know, everyone's got their own interpretation. And I think this is the importance of integration, you know, which comes down to the interpretation of what you just experienced, plus the integration or application of it in your life. And so, you know, people have big experiences about what's going on in some kind of ultimate reality. I mean, one of those experiences, and I've had it, is that mushrooms, for example, are really intelligent beings who are here for the evolution of our species, to introduce the possibility of humanity 2.0. And I've had this experience in ayahuasca too, where certainly I would say that she is for us. I've even had the experience where it feels to all the world like there's like some kind of off-planet species working through my DNA and healing the trauma. And the feeling is that it's an upgrade. I'm getting an upgrade on DNA. So surgery is being performed on me, and I'm going to, like, I don't know, but so who knows? That's one way of looking at it, that these intelligent beings are introducing us to a higher resonance or a higher frequency, more light, living out of more light. I mean, that's one way to interpret it, and I've received it like that. The thing is, if you have a different metaphysical worldview, you won't interpret it like that. But because I have this theological background, and I sort of feel like something's coming online that's for us here and cares a lot about what our species is doing currently.
Cool, thanks, Bruce. Another from Elena with an A. This is, do you incorporate any somatic techniques during or post session?
If it's indicated. I'm loath to introduce any particular protocols, you know. Like, I think the most important thing that psychedelic psychotherapist can do is learn the competency of not inserting my ego and my ambition into your process. So I will track what's coming up. And for example, if a person wants me to massage their leg or lay a hand on their abdomen, and as long as there's permission, or rub their shoulders or do some freeing up of, you know, absolutely, I'll do that. But I won't insert that just because I think everybody should have body work during psychedelics. Some people find it very helpful, some people don't. So I track. In the same way, I don't say that people need to be listening to a music list and be blindfolded. I mean, it's like, it's your journey, and I'm here to track and be with you as much as I'm able. But body work certainly is one more modality that can free up where tensions have been stored through trauma.
Cool. All right, thanks. Next, we're going to go live to Evan, who you should now be. Oh, sorry, Evan. I think we just unmuted each other. Go right ahead.
Am I good?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Perfect.
Hear you loud and clear.
All right. So I just had a couple questions about like where someone that is interested in getting into psychedelic psychotherapy should start, and if you have like any advice for those kind of people.
Sure. So there are plenty of places now that are starting up so-called training and integration. So the first step would be to choose where you want to do your training as a psychotherapist or psychologist, get those credentials. And the second step is specifically getting training as an integration therapist. And California Institute of Integral Studies is offering a year-long program. And lots of entrepreneurs are popping up with these 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 months programs. So you just got to have your ear to the ground. Check out CIIS for that. Let me add a caveat here. I would say the absolute best model for becoming an integration specialist with psychedelics is apprenticeship. It's historically what happened. If you wanted to do this work, you would journey with a master, with someone who's seen it all, who's not afraid of what's going to come up because they've been through it, and who is with whom you are apprenticing. So you're learning from somebody who you believe has a lot of competency, and I think that's irreplaceable. And in fact, sometimes I think that all these integration programs can be offering kind of some false confidence. So the best training is do lots of the medicine yourself, do your own healing process, find a mentor, apprentice with that person. And then if you still feel like you want to get a certificate or something, then find one of these programs and take the training, if that helps you.
Thanks. I've already got a head start on the medicine myself, so.
Great.
Awesome. Thanks, Evan. I'm going to read another one out, which is from Heather. COVID canceled my American healer's visit. She had suggested I go ahead without her, but I wonder if that's a good idea. What sort of support should I seek?
Well, if you have some familiarity with the medicine, in other words, if you're experienced as tripping, doing these journeys, then, sure, go ahead. You can do it on your own. Ideally, you'd have somebody there, a trusted friend, who could, be sitting with you or sitting 6 feet away or sitting in the next room. So it all depends on your comfort level and your level of familiarity with the medicine. You don't really want to be on your own and be having a challenging time. And if you find that you're anxious about the thought of that, then probably trust it and don't do it on your own. If you feel comfortable and relaxed, then I would say, of course, go ahead.
Cool, thank you. Next up is from Adam. Can you talk about the logistics of sessions, especially where someone takes LSD that can be very long?
Yeah, so typically, like, for example, in the work that I do, I'll negotiate with the person how long they want me there. And typically it's 4 hours, so that I'll arrive at their place after they've taken the medicine, so that it's already starting to come on, and I'll be there during when it's the strongest. And then in an ideal world, a friend will come over as I'm leaving and be able to sit with them if they're still in the medicine for the next 2 to 3 hours. So I would say that I like to stay for a minimum of 4 hours. And then if people want to negotiate for longer, we can. But it's expensive, right? Because you're paying, like, let's be honest, you're paying for my time. And so, it can get expensive to go longer. But the way to counter that is to get a trusted friend to come over after. So when I'm leaving, you're not alone. And make sure the person knows not to ask you 6,000 questions about your experience. just to leave you alone, man. Just like let you be. If you want to talk, you talk. They really need to know, they have to have some skill in being comfortable with silence, not feeling like they need to do too much. Because that can be really off-putting if you're tripping and someone's like asking 1,000 questions to deal with because it helps them with their own anxiety. It's like, it's not good.
Cool, makes sense. Awesome. Now, it just maybe to put a little bit extra around the logistics, usually there's like pre and post work. Like what is the bookends of that look like? You do like some sessions before and integration after. Can you just kind of finish the whole package of what that looks like?
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's important follow-up. I mean, I'd like to be in a psychotherapeutic relationship with the person first, but some people have read my book and say, no, they just want to do the journey. So I go, okay, well, so then I'll insist on at least 2 pre-journey sessions to build rapport, to hear intentions, to establish set and setting, to make sure they have clean medicine. You know, then we do the intensive part of the journey, and then at least 1 integration session afterwards, but typically it involves more integration sessions. So that's how I tend to work.
Excellent, thank you. So next up, another from Elena. Elena with an E. Do you think that parents and teenaged children should trip together?
Sure. I mean, you know, if you got to be a brave parent to do that, and maybe you get some facilitation if you're not completely comfortable with these medicines. And so, but I think it would be brilliant, for example, to do MDMA together. Because a lot of stuff's going to come out in that context. And I suppose it depends on, like, you know, my therapist tells a story about his son at age 5 accidentally taking some LSD. And his son was fine. Like, it turns out, you know, they held him, and, you know, his son got through that. So I've never really thought about, is there like a minimum age that, you know, probably I think so. Like what's coming to mind right now is like, yeah, 16.
Cool, makes sense. All right, so next up is from Paul. What are some common cultural norms that traumatize or prevent healing that you have to reprogram to help people? What are your thoughts on ego usefulness after healing traumas and ego transcendence?
Yeah, big question. So yeah, in that construction of ego that I talked about in response to trauma, or the trauma self or the false self, like, the nice thing is that often we can form competencies based in that false construction of the ego. So we might be really good, we might have developed a skill of being tenacious with a task, like being hypervigilant. That skill, when we become conscious of it, can help us at work. Like, it can really help us to be well organized, tenacious with finishing, you know, the task that was given to us. And so the nice thing is, like, but instead of, you know, that false self being in the driver's seat, it's now in the back seat. And every once in a while, you can consciously take it out of the back seat and say, I need to implement this thing that I learned in response to trauma to help me with my life now. But it's conscious, not compulsive. But it's like no competency that you developed in the formation of the false self can't be used consciously in this transcendent self space. And to the question of transcendence, I would think, yeah, we haven't talked about it, but, you know, part of the beauty of these medicines is it happens anywhere on the continuum of trauma to transcendence, where you can taste into this non-dual space, where you realize that you are the presence of that love in human form here and now in this body, and stay connected with source as you go about your life. And I think that there's real potential with that. Having tasted into that, that space of no separation anywhere, that we are one with all that is, then the integration work is orienting from that in our everyday lives, which I think is one of the beautiful possibilities with these medicines too.
Excellent, thank you. Quick note to anyone, if anyone wants to share a question anonymously, you can message it directly to Ken on the chat and remind me that you want to be anonymous, and I'll ask it anonymously. Next up from Olivia, have you ever tried TRE, trauma release exercises, in psychedelic sessions?
Well, again, I mean, there's all these great modalities. They all are fine, but my experience is like when the trauma wants to be released, the trauma is released. I spent 4 hours with somebody yesterday. I didn't have to do a damn thing, and I just watched him release massive amounts of trauma. And I mean, it's not easy to be with, I'll say that, but if you have skills in helping, you know, trauma release, you know, whatever the modality, by all means, it can be helpful. And it's my experience that it's just gonna, like in my own work, like when the trauma was ready to come out, the trauma came out. You know?
Cool, makes sense. First anonymous question, do you do any couples therapy with psychedelics?
I do. Primarily with MDMA, because it's it's an empathogen or an entactogen. And so it's a heart opening. And so because you kind of break through all of the defensive regimens that have been set up in intimate relationships over years. And those just kind of are broken down. And it's kind of a heart-to-heart experience. I mean, I remember doing this with my wife, and like I had this cub in place, this core unconscious belief that I was inadequate. And, you know, so whenever she indicated that I wasn't enough for her, I would go like crazy. I would get defensive. And then we were in the medicine, and she started talking about this again. And all of a sudden I wasn't defensive. And I said to her, "Oh, you just want more of me." And it was like, you want more of me because it's so beautiful to be with me, like when I'm not defended. Like it was just so simple. Whereas before it would just set me off. So the connection with, you know, in the absence of my defenses or hers, was deeper and faster.
Excellent, excellent. Got another one here. This is from Jeremy. What would a therapeutic dose of psilocybin look like for being able to help with trauma?
It really depends on the individual. Some people will go deep, like I've gone into my own trauma on a gram. Other people need a much higher dose, anywhere from 3 to 5 grams. And so you just got to know your sensitivity. And when you're starting out, you know, just you might want to start lower if you really don't know, like start with a gram, start with 2 grams, and then have some boosters on hand an hour in if you don't feel like it's getting you where you want to go. But generally speaking, you know, you want it to work. So I have a slight bias towards, like I started my own psychedelic psychotherapy taking fairly low doses, and then it went higher. So I was eventually taking 300-400 micrograms of LSD, and then certainly 4 to 5 grams of mushrooms. But, you know, other people would need less. For whatever reasons, there's just more sensitivity. So it's a very personal matter.
Awesome, awesome. Well, There's one more question that I don't really understand. Balin, if you're out there and wanted to unmute your mic and ask that question, I didn't really understand what you had asked clearly in the chat. But anyone wants to jump in for a last question? I don't see anything else. If you want to raise your hand, we can jump in. Start getting some oh, here we go. Got one more from Elena with an A. Have you seen instances where the released trauma reestablished itself to nearly the same degree? It's a good one.
Yeah. So, you know, like part of the healing process is that trauma can recur. And so you might have a big release, but I mean, for a long time in my own journey, for example, I'd have the same kind of body release through my hips and through my back. And it's just a lot of shaking. And I bet it would be like every journey. It was like, it started with that. It just, so it's almost like cumulative life experience. We've just taught our body to accumulate stress in these particular areas in our body. And so we'll default to them. I think what happens is that you spend less and less time, like you can move through that trauma quicker. You know what it is. You can, even outside of the psychedelic experience, do trauma release stuff with, you know, in my case, it's my hips. And it just takes less time. You don't have to live with it as long. And eventually, I think the releases can be complete.
Excellent. So the last one we've got, I think, here is Evan, who wants to ask live again. So Evan, at your will, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, so I'll just make this one pretty quick. Do you have a preference with working between psilocybin or LSD, and do you find there's a particular difference or anything beyond the duration?
No, the duration is mainly it. I mean, there are people who talk about, you know, the mushrooms kind of taking you more down into the earth. It's more of an organic substance, and the light medicine taking you more up into the light. And, you know, that's a general rule of thumb. But then I've had, you know, mushroom experiences where I'm, you know, it's the view from 60,000 feet. And I've had LSD experiences that have taken me down and in. So I think it becomes personal preference.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. There is one more around using, this is one I've heard of once or twice, if there's any kind of, if anyone is using PCP, phencylamine, for any type of this work.
Is that a general question?
Yeah, it's just, Bruce, I guess if you're familiar with anyone using PCP for this type of work, I've heard of it used out there, but never in a therapeutic setting.
I don't know. No, I have no knowledge of that, and I've not worked with it myself.
Okay. Awesome. Well, unless someone wants to do a quick hand raise or unmute and ask a question, we are through with the Q&A.
Ken, I was just going to add a little bit. I'm not sure if, when you say PCP, do they mean more of like the ketamine? Because I know that ketamine was derived from PCP originally, so I don't know if they're referring to something in that class or specifically PCP.
That's a good question. This was Balin. He asked it in the chat. What is the difference between what is known as PCP versus what we're discussing here? So I assume that meant like if people are using that in a therapeutic setting, which I've never heard of before.
I've had clients, you know, use ketamine. I don't personally administer it because I've never experienced it myself, but they've gone off to clinics and used ketamine, and some have had really good experience, and some, you know, it's been less effective for them. So
cool. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for the great questions. And Christoph, you want to hand it back to you? If anything you wanted to bring up before we jump into the breakouts?
Yeah, no, I wanted to just thank Bruce for coming and being part of this. And then also just remind you guys that we will be doing just another maybe 10 minutes or so of questions just towards the end.
Okay, yeah. So no, I was just saying basically how there was a lot of moments where I realized like the concepts that he was discussing, and then he gave examples as well, which really helped elucidate the what he was like the concept in practice, and then I was able to compare that to actual instances in my own life. And it had these like aha moments where I was just like, wow, okay, I realized what he's talking about. And like, it actually made sense for me. It's like you have this sort of epiphany. And that really, like, that was really sort of like these big moments that actually brought a lot out for it. And there's a lot to think about following finishing the book. I just finished it last night. And I was also going to say, like, those last 3 chapters, that really sort of some of the concepts we were talking about today, if anyone wants to go over that in a little bit more detail, you did a really good job at sort of explaining the cabs and the cubs before. So
thanks.
Awesome.